Hey, my name is Josh Deltener. I'm a Nuxt ambassador and a instructor over at Mastering Nuxt. During the day, I work with Nuxt all the time, working at realtruck.com, the world's largest pickup truck and off-road accessory e-commerce site, which is pretty exciting. The way that we use it, we actually built a platform on top of it and customized it so that one code base actually runs a whole bunch of different websites, which is pretty exciting. So my talk today is getting started with Nuxt 3. Currently we're on Nuxt 2 and we're migrating to Nuxt 3. So a lot of this is fresh in my mind as we go through some of these steps. What is Nuxt? Basically, it's a meta framework built on Vue. Nuxt wouldn't exist without Vue itself. In a lot of ways, it also is built on top of Vue Router and Vuex, although both of those are optional. Without Vue Router, I do wonder what kind of website you would have if you can't go places. But it's actually much more than that. When the Nuxt team upgraded from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, they actually built pretty much everything from scratch. They used TypeScript, and they wanted to build everything in such a way that it can be ran in a whole bunch of different environments. It's no longer just a server type environment where you have a little server that spins up somewhere and renders the site. They wanted to be able to run this in pretty much anywhere at the edge, in Lambdas, stuff like that. So they built an entire library off of UnJS, and off of UnJS, they built a whole bunch of other modules using that same framework. So for example, Nitro, it's a super fast web server that can run pretty much anywhere. Lambdas, Azure, Bun, Dino, what have you. It can run on those natively. Now, inside of that, they built another thing called H3. And you can kind of think of that as a lower level of Express, kind of. It's literally the raw HTTP framework for high performance and portability. There's also OFetch, which they made specifically to replace fetch in a lot of ways, so that you can run it both on Node and in the browsers and even in workers. So imagine making your application using OFetch, and you don't have to worry about what context this is in anymore, whether to check if it exists, if you're in the browser. It handles all that stuff for you. So some of the primary features of Nuxt. First one is zero configuration. You can literally get started with no configuration at all. It has sensible defaults and has a lot of performance built in right off of those defaults. So you can kind of expand as you need to, and it gets you up and running very, very quickly. It's also really easy to customize. And that's one of the things that we kind of like about it, is that if there's a certain feature that you don't like, let's say the automatic routing building based off your page structure. Like if you don't like that, you can literally replace it with whatever you want. It's modular that way. It's also extendable, like through modules and layers. So take, for example, if you have a CMS you want to integrate with, or a chat provider, or a database, or a caching layer, like all of those can be available as modules that expose their functionality right into Nuxt itself. And if there isn't something off the shelf that you can get for Nuxt using a module, you can write your own. And you'll see this throughout this presentation. One of the things that Nuxt embraces, which honestly I really enjoy, is convention over configuration. So a lot of different ways you can control the way something acts just by naming a file a certain way or naming a directory a certain way, rather than going through configuration. But that being said, again, you can disable almost anything that you don't like in Nuxt and put the configuration in yourself. It's very flexible. So as I mentioned before, performance is one of the big paramounts of Nuxt. For example, lazy loading. You can do this both client side, and now you can actually do it server side as well. So if you have an application that renders both server and client, since they're lazy loading only the things you need on the server, it can start up very, very quickly. So think of a Lambda startup time or an edge worker, startup time. If you're not using some of the things that you require, it'll spin up very, very quickly. So it's very efficient that way. Again, client side with lazy loading, you don't have to download the entire website before you start using it. It'll download whatever it needs for the page that you're currently looking at. And once you navigate, it'll load the stuff for that page as well, and so on. Another feature is smart prefetching. By default, if you're on a page and let's say you have some links to certain pages that you want to navigate from there, it'll intelligently find those links and send prefetches for those. Again, that's optimized for performance so that it waits, so that you're not totally beating up the CPU or the network and stuff like that. But it knows which links are coming up and it'll prefetch those for you. It's pretty sweet. And of course, it has server-side rendering. So what that means is literally on the first page hit, it'll render it on server side, which is great for social sharing because you have to need that in order to do socials because Facebook and other providers, Twitter, they don't render JavaScript. So you're going to need server-side rendering in order to get those social sharing. And of course, first contentful paint, having a good time to first byte and a meaningful first payload when you get the rendered page really helps with that. So after the first page hit, everything is a client-side SPA. So when going from page to page, the navigation is very, very quick because you don't have to re-render the entire page, re-execute all that marketing JavaScript, etc. It's all still within the same DOM. You're just modifying the DOM. So it's very, very quick. Let's talk about rendering. There's a bunch of different ways that you can handle this in Nux 3. The first one, which is my favorite, and we use this ourselves over at RealTruck, is universal rendering. So basically, when you hit the website for the first time, it'll render the page server side, give you a fully rendered DOM back on the first page hit, and then every page after that is SPA. It's also pre-rendered. This is what I do in my own website. Basically, whenever I make a change, it'll tell the builder to go through my site and generate a new Nux build. And it'll go through each one of those pages and pre-render those. Now, what's kind of interesting about that is that when it pre-renders those, it's pre-rendering landing pages. So even when you pre-render your entire site, it's still an SPA after the first hit. Client side only. Some people do this for applications where they want more of a structure and they still want an SPA, but they don't need server-side rendering or SEO or any of that stuff. They want a structure that gives them modularity and configuration through convention and all those other things. And I've seen people use this for SPAs. And there's also something called a hybrid, which you can actually choose which rendering method you want on a per route basis. At the end of the day, you're running a server-side universal application with this. But when you get the return value from the server, it'll know what kind of response you want based on the route matching logic. So for example, I could have my homepage be totally static, but I could have my blog, for example, be dynamic if I wanted to, or do the stale while revalidate, those types of things on a per route basis if I really wanted to. And of course, edge rendering. This is a relatively newish type of feature, but basically you're in an environment that isn't necessarily full-blown node. It's kind of a stripped down version of that because it isn't using the Chrome runtime that everything else usually uses in the node environment. This is a stripped down environment. Nux totally supports that. So if you wanted your application to literally run at the edge, you can do that. So let's talk about how you get into your application. Basically, there's an app.view file that kind of contains, as you would imagine, your entire app. Inside of that, you have your Nux layout and your Nux page. It wraps those things together. So it renders all of those inside of it. And so one of the things you can use this for is importing global styles or some other site-wide logic you just want to spin up once the site is rendered client-side. So let's talk about layouts. They're wrappers for components and pages. And of course, they can be written on a per page basis. And they're auto-imported via the layouts folder. So one of the nice things about this is that if you wanted to switch layouts, let's say you had a simple shopping cart. Some people have that functionality where you have a full-blown header and footer and all that stuff on your regular website, but you kind of want to narrow people's focus when they start to get out the checkout funnel. I've seen people have stripped down headers and footers for that flow. Well, you can totally do that with layouts. In general, if you only have one layout, you don't really need to monkey around with layouts themselves. You can just put your headers and footers inside of your app.view file. But this certainly gives you the functionality you need to do whatever you want. Likewise, you can have other layouts that have other routines that automatically do authentication and stuff like that. And as I mentioned, the simple checkout mode example. Let's talk about pages and routing. Underneath the hood, it uses View Router for the entire routing system. So that's used both server side and client side. And again, those are auto-imported via pages. So again, you'll see this over and over again, auto-import, auto-import. It just works by having files inside of folders in a certain way. But again, you can totally disable that if you wanted to. So again, routes are generated via folder and file names. There's dynamic routes where you can have one page that accepts multiple sub-routes within it. And I'll show you that in a couple minutes here. And of course, nested routes as well, where you can have a parent page and then content inside of that page from the sub-routes in the URL. There's also catch-all routes as well. If you don't know how many end routes there's going to be off of a certain page or URL, you can just have them all funnel into a page and it will catch all of those. So here's an example. Here's basic routing. I have a pages folder with the index.view. That's going to be your home page. If I had pages/blog.view or even pages blog index.view, that'll go to the blog page. And if I have a article1.view off of the blog folder, the URL will be blog/article1. So this is where it gets interesting. In dynamic routing, you don't know how many combinations there are going to be. So you can have very specific files that gets translated into parameters automatically through Nuxt. So here's a pages folder with a users folder with a file with braces and ID .view. So automatically it knows that this is going to be a dynamic parameter, and I'm going to translate that into ID. And so with the URL being users/1, ID is automatically 1. So you can get even more crazy than that. You can have multiple dynamic parameters within a given URL and file. So here the directory is physically called users dash bracket group bracket ID bracket. And so with the URL being users-admin/2, it splits those out because it knows how to match these patterns. Group equals admins, ID equals 2. And this is where the catch-all comes in. If you had a file with ... slug in it, it knows that that's kind of a slush bucket of unknown variables. So it's automatically going to put those into whatever variable name that you specified in the file name as an array of values. So let's talk about middleware. This runs before each page render. So it'll do it both client side and server side, auto imported via middleware. And as I mentioned, it's both client and server. And you can even have global middleware if you wanted to, which automatically is executed before all pages. Or you can specify which pages should execute a given piece of middleware. This is especially useful for protected pages where you need authentication. So here's an example. This folder is called middleware, and my example is foo.global.ts. Using the define Nuxt route middleware, it'll execute that automatically, and I have 2 helper functions to do whatever I want to do. I mean, of course, you can do much more than this, but these are more geared towards the routing of middleware. You can abort navigation, or you can steer it a different direction, for example. Now, if you wanted to have name middleware, where you're going to use this on multiple pages, like I want auth on a certain subset of pages, you can have this middleware underneath middleware/auth.ts, for example, and it'll know that this name is going to be auth. And so inside of your pages, you can use what's called define page meta, and you can tell it which middleware you want to execute on this page. And if you really want to, you could have anonymous middleware as well, where there isn't actually a separate file, it's just inlined as well. One of my favorite features of Nuxt is plugins. We use them a lot. And they're code that's ran while Nuxt is initializing. Of course, it's auto-imported via plugins, both client and server, either or both. And what's really nice is you can provide global helpers as well. So here's some naming conventions for plugins. They're ran alphabetically. So plugin/foo example, that's ran globally automatically. If you added .client, it's only ran client. And if you had .server, it's only ran server side. What I really like about plugins is it gives you the opportunity to kind of either have stuff that's spun up automatically when your application executes, or it also provides a good abstraction layer. So one of the things that happened to us a couple of years ago is in 1 year, we went through 3 chat providers. Long story, but thankfully we extracted chat into a plugin. So through our system with Nuxt, we provided a helper that said chat is going to be $chat, and it's going to have one function called open. So no matter where you need to open chat, you can use that, and behind the scenes, you can change that chat provider to whatever you want. All right, so this is what I was talking about, where you can provide helpers. So here's just a really basic function. You can provide like a hello function. You can have it be a parameter of a message, and you can use that in your page, which is on the right-hand side here, where you can get that plugin helper through use Nuxt app. And inside your page, you can just call it with whatever parameter you want. And so it would literally say, hello, world, because that's the function you provided. So imagine on the left-hand side being a chat provider. Inside the plugin, it's gonna run all the chat provider spin up blob of JavaScript they gave you, right? You can lazy load it, you can do whatever you want. It's behind the scenes, it'll do whatever you tell it to do. But inside the rest of your application, you can import chat When they click on this button, you run chat open. So imagine again, if you're going through 3 chat providers within a year, you can change the stuff on the left however you want, just as long as it has a .open function that the rest of the system depends on. It was really, really slick. And I recommend doing it if you're going to have some sensitive areas that are subject to change. Another really powerful feature about Nuxt is modules. They can customize and extend pretty much whatever you want. If there is a feature within Nuxt that is available, you can change it, customize it, add it within a module. And of course, it's auto-imported via modules. And you can add external modules right into Nuxt config. So there's actually a module store that's accessed through the Nuxt website. And you can have a boatload of different modules to meet your needs. So if you don't want to write your own, you can certainly see if someone's already written one for you. There's also a bunch of modules written by the Nuxt team or some of their members, and those are available to add as well. So here's an example of a module. A lot of the functionality that you use inside of a module is from something called NuxtKit. It's specifically made to make your life easier for modules. So as a setup function where you can do different things, you can add a server middleware, for example, or a server handler rather, that actually creates a server endpoint just by creating this module. So here's another example. This one adds plugins and other modules using this module. I actually grabbed this from our Nuxt 3 application, where we're using a library called Globby to go through different directories and allow us to have different levels of directories and whatnot to add plugins within a given subfolder. So there's another thing called layers, and that is even bigger than modules. What's really nice about them is you can take dang near your regular Nuxt application folder structure and turn it into a layer. So you can use different parts of your existing application in other applications. It's actually pretty crazy. Again, you can share configs, presets, whatever you want across different applications. You can even share component libraries via a components folder, like the sky is unlimited. So how you can use these. So let's talk about the server directory. One of the things that Nuxt 3 allows you to do is actually configure server APIs from a server directory. So here it's creating a server API off of the server directory automatically. We're doing, again, file and folder names drive the individual endpoints that will be generated. And I'll show you that in a minute. What's really nice about this is types are auto-generated as well. Again, the whole system was built with TypeScript in mind from the ground up. And what's really great for this is back end for front end. If you wanted to have like an orchestration layer inside of your Nuxt application via an API, or if you need to reach out to other APIs, for example, where you have to pass them a secret, you can make an internal API like this to talk to some of those more sensitive areas while keeping that secret away from client side. So here's an example of a server API. So here the file name is server/API/hello. Again, you might see this pattern being kind of familiar. We have bracket, I don't remember if those are brackets or braces, whatever they're called, name, and the URL that you would hit here or that it would generate would be literally /API/hello. And so if I was to hit Josh off of that endpoint, again, that gets translated right into a parameter, and you can access that directly within your API itself. Second example, the same type of thing, only here, we're narrowing it down to just GET requests. You can have GET, delete, post, stuff like that. And so this would be accessible through a regular GET request through /API/test. You did a post, it would reject it. And the bottom one, that's the good old catch-all. So whatever you want, as long as you have something in front of it, it'll go into that catch-all. You can put this catch-all anywhere you want. Whatever pattern it matches, it'll give you whatever parameters it got and generate acceptable route handlers for that. So another one is server routes. And it's literally more or less exactly the same as server/API, except you can have the routes from the root of the URL rather than always /API. One of the things we use this for is a dynamics robot.txt file. In our system, we allow people to edit from a CMS system. And so we fetch that CMS data whenever robots.txt is requested. And so we use server routes for that. Of course, it's cached and stuff like that, but it's every so often. So along with server routes and server APIs, you can actually have server middleware. And that is ran before any server-side request, which is really pretty nice. Again, it's auto-imported. And one of the use cases, if you want to check headers for authentication, or you can even modify the request object before the other API endpoints get it. So if you want to test for authentication and you want to shove a user ID or something into the incoming request before the other APIs from your API folder get it, you can totally do that. Now it's time for a little demo. All right, so for the demo, I'm just gonna go through a couple areas of my personal website, deltener.com. And so the environment that you have is powered by Vite. And for here, I use Yarn. And so I'll spin up the dev environment. You have a little loading screen on the right-hand side. And it is ready to go. So it does hot module reloading as we kind of expect nowadays. I'll just kind of prove that works. So for a couple exclamation points, hit save, and there they are. They instantly uploaded and have refreshed. The syntax here, I guess pay not much attention to it because this is in Pug, which is why it may look a little bit funky. Most of you are probably just using standard HTML. At work, we use Pug, and honestly, I really love it because it's a lot cleaner looking. You don't have to maintain, /div/div over and over again, and have twice as many lines or confusion. But it's pretty nice. And so one of the modules that I use is actually Nux content. And what that allows us to do is have markdown files that automatically turn into APIs for your content system. And it has a bunch of helper methods as well for you to query stuff and use it as a database, which is pretty nice. So take, for example, inside of the blog folder, I need content. Here's my markdown. I have front matter that kind of defines what I want some of that data to be. You can have custom components within here itself that render automatically as view components. So here's my YouTube video example. You can do stuff directly in here as if it was a regular view component. And you can even stick view components in here if you wanted to. But for me, I just wanted to try to keep it as markdowny as possible. So that's the way I have it. So for example, here's my YouTube video component. I get the prop, which is the ID, as you saw in the markdown file. I take that and shove it into the iframe and render it, just like that. There's also, as you saw before, depending on the folder structure that you have, it'll automatically create those routes. So here's my catch-all for my blog articles. They all fall into this. Here's the blog root folder. Looks a little funny, to be honest, but you kind of get used to it, and it's really, really powerful. Inside of here, you can add stuff directly to head using use head. And here's that Nuxt module that I talked about, Nuxt content, where you can literally query your information that you already have with all these markdown articles as if they were a database. One of the other things I wanted to kind of highlight here is something that recently, I guess, came up, which is Nuxt Dev Tools. And I found I really enjoy them. It's this little guy here. So from here, as you're doing development, you can get a whole bunch of handy information about the project you're currently on. So here I can see all my routes. So if I create a file and a folder and I wanted to make sure that I had everything right, you can see it show up in here. It knows that this is a catch-all, and here's the name for it underneath the variable. Likewise, any middleware would come in here as well. Here's all my components. Those are automatically registered. You can go through and see the different components that you've created, as well as runtime components and built-in components that are Nuxt native. Imports for all of your composables, as well as the boatload of built-in composables that come with Nuxt. Again, those are really handy to make sure that you're using the right names and that your stuff is being registered as you would expect. Here's my content module that I talked about. I'm using Nuxt image as well, which automatically takes your image and allows it to be transformed in different ways across a wide variety of different providers, whether it be Cloudinary or ImageX or whatever. Assets, just random assets I have in the site. Runtime configs. This is all the stuff that's actually in my configuration files, both public and I think maybe private. I don't really have any private stuff because all my stuff is client side. This is the current payload for this page. So this will change on a per page basis, which is really nice. You can see the page payload that came into this from async data. Is the open graph stuff that you admitted. So it's smart enough to know that I made these tags, I spit these tags out, and it knows that these are open graph tags and has a summary right here, which is really nice. Even some recommendations if you wanted to. Plugins, again, really, really handy. Whether or not it came in through a module or if it's server or client or global, your own plugins would exist here as well. And the other thing I want to touch on is hooks. Now, inside of the Nuxt lifecycle, there's a bunch of different ways you can change the way something is functioning. And one of those behind the scenes ways to do that is through a hook. On the Nuxt website, they have a bunch of them listed. Some of them are from Vue itself or Nitro itself, but this gives you a nice list of what all those are, which one's fired, and how long they took, which is really handy. So yeah, you can do a whole bunch of different things with Nuxt hooks. They're usually used in more advanced scenarios, but I would definitely check them out if you want to really extend and customize the deep inner workings of your Nuxt environment. That's my presentation. I'm ready for any questions you may have.
Okay, great presentation, Josh. I wanted to say it was very thorough, and I actually, learned a lot again about Vue and the ecosystem. It's been maybe 6 months since I looked at Vue. I looked at it while I was interviewing, and so some of the questions that I'm going to ask you are kind of for people out there who are looking for work. I think that's like kind of a main thing that I get as feedback from the community. A lot of people, as you know, right now are looking for work and want to get more software engineering work. Vue is kind of one of those things that is pretty popular right now. So if you were going to hire somebody, pretend you're the interviewer, what kind of things would you be looking for? What kind of things would you want to see, in addition to, like, if somebody were to say, they had familiarity with Vue and Nuxt, what are some of the top questions you might ask about those things?
Sure. I think a personal site or a demo site kind of demonstrating your competency would be really helpful. A lot of people can talk the talk, so to speak, but the proof is in what you've done, especially with Chat GPT and other stuff feeding people answers nowadays. Um, it's nice to see you've had work. And of course, if you have a variety of work, like if you work for an agency, like that's really cool because you know that you've been pulled in different directions and have like a wide breadth of experience versus just being in one spot all the time. That being said, if you have been using Vue for a while and let's say you haven't even been using professionally for a while, that's totally all right. Again, it comes down to the projects that you've worked at, or at least being able to talk about some of the cool things you did with it or why you enjoyed it versus some of the other technologies that you've been working with. A lot of what I hire on, to be honest, there's partially experience, but partially with implied aptitude and passion. Like I've hired a number of people that they didn't know X, Y, and Z, but I was pretty darn confident they could pick it up fairly quickly and run with it and be very, very proficient with it.
Okay.
And that's served me very well for a very long time.
Okay, so you're looking more for people who have aptitude and can kind of pick things up. As we know in programming world, things change all the time.
Yeah.
Guys, documentation, lack of documentation. um, I think Vue is exemplary in some of that because when I looked at Vue, I realized it was at Vue 3, and then there was sort of some improvements to Vue at that time. And we had another talk about Vue maybe like a month or month and a half ago. And so, stuff moves really fast. How do you and your team, how do you as a software engineer kind of inform your team? Like, what are the things you're doing to kind of let the rest of your team keep up and know like what they need to know? Or how important is that to the office? Because in the office you may be working with one version of Vue for a long time, or one project for a long time. So how important is it to keep up with changes?
Yeah, I think it's important to at least be aware of those changes, right? So we've been using Vue 2 for, gosh, I'm gonna say like 6 years. We've been on Nux 2 for like 6 years, and we're finally getting the opportunity to migrate to Nux 3 and Vue 3 and TypeScript and all that. So what you're describing is literally what we're going through now is a big slap in the face. And so what I try to do is as I see stuff I go to Twitter daily, I go to Discord daily. As part of my regular regimen, I look at the people that I follow to make sure I'm on top of things. And it served us well a number of times because we got to know like how do we dump IE 11 gracefully? How do we incorporate this new Vue 3.3 thing into the next project that we're doing where it's an experimental API or what have you, or even with Tailwind or some of the other things that we've been using, being able to follow certain people that have good information on that so you can kind of see what is coming, whether it be performance related, what the latest browsers are compatible with, CSS, and all those stuff. I like to look at all of those things on a daily basis. Now, granted, I don't sit there and surf the internet all day. I wish I could, but I can't. But at least going through like maybe half an hour, 20 minutes of the day to just make sure you hit all your lists. And oh, I remember we're still waiting on Safari to be compatible with X, Y, and Z, but before we can dump this polyfill, those types of things. Being able to have your little checklist or wish list of stuff that you're looking for, and keeping track of that is usually pretty helpful.
Very cool. I think that's actually kind of a good strategy in itself. Like I would agree, looking at Twitter and or X as it's called now, and
Yeah.
you know, just kind of following your favorite writers and authors and blog. I think that helps a lot. I think in my own week too, I kind of think about like how I organize, like how much I want to research versus how much I actually need to do the work, right? And pick up
Yeah,
tickets, and organize all that. So, sometimes I'll have conversations with my coworkers too, how much time are you practicing or working with this code, you know, during a week? And are you doing it sort of out after hours? Or are you doing it like during work? What's a good strategy for kind of like balancing it, Um, do you just kind of like, I guess like another thing is, do you take it like kind of month by month? Because there's so many aspects to front end and back end, right? Where you just kind of like, do you spend like 1 month kind of like focusing on one particular aspect? Like this month I'm going to do, like components and, CSS or styled components or material UI or whatever you want to call it, right? And it's in the
sure.
view framework. So they give me the view equivalents. But basically like what's your week to week look like as far as like building these projects?
Yeah, for the one that we've been working on, which is actually pretty massive, it's not like we, have a specific focusing, for Vue, we're going to focus on composables or what have you. It's more like a feature by feature mindset and what stuff we need to learn to put together. So a lot of days or a lot of weeks is not necessarily centered around Vue, because after you get used to Vue, it's always there for you and you can do whatever you want with it after you get that base knowledge. It's like, how do you tie those other things into Vue where it makes sense? Especially with Nuxt, where you have to think in two different ways. Is it going to be doing this server side? Is it going to be doing this client side? Is it going to change between those states? Is it going to break from hydration errors because I changed the state? Am I going to poison my server side instance by doing X, Y, and Z in a certain way? There's a lot of different things you have to worry about when you're actually dealing with the real server. Um, but from our week by week, again, it's more centered around big features that are coming down. And as far as focus, again, it's not necessarily with Vue, but we do have our little focus areas. For example, in back of my mind is, all right, we have to get back to performance. How do we make sure that everything is running as smoothly as possible? And how do we fight the giant JavaScript marketing blob that's coming, from all these integrations that we've been doing, and whether it be the marketing pixels or these trackers or remarketing stuff, along with all the ad trackers and just there's a boatload of marketing stuff. So it's like there'll be spurts of like 1 month where I'm just deep diving into performance related stuff, and that's where I go to my X or my Discord or what have you and look through some of the performance articles and look at where are we at, what are the pain points, what can we control, and what are the little tweaks we can do. Do we need to preload something? Do we need to move an asset to our own domain so that it loads faster rather than the CDN at a different domain? All those different little tweaks here and there as you go.
Yeah, no, that's a great set of answers. And I guess as you are finding these things out, you're sort of advocating or creating like new work or tickets with the team, or are, like making use of those grooming and planning meetings, I suppose, like where you're,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if we had a big performance push when we first, went to Nuxt a while ago. We wanted to really concentrate on building the whole thing as fast as we could.
Mhm.
And so we did it in a relatively short period of time. We had a Vue single page app that we first started out with. I mean, before a bunch of legacy PHP database stuff, but then we tried Vue, really liked it, tried to do server side rendering ourselves, failed miserably, then started using Nuxt. And so it was about that time, maybe a couple of months after, where it's like, okay, how can we make this as fast as humanly possible? And that's where we started looking at all these articles, like the nitty gritty performance stuff, like time to first byte. How do you do that? How do you get the stuff out of your renderer's way? How do you remove all these different APIs that you have to wait on in order to give you the first meaningful DOM back from the server? Like, how do you load fonts correctly? And most, efficient way possible. Like all those things. I can go on forever with performance topics because you can spend literally infinite time, tweaking things.
Mhm.
We've been around Nuxt and Vue for so long. We have a pretty darn good idea of how to accomplish what we need to do. And we never need to do something that's so fundamentally different, at least nowadays, that would change a boatload of core functionality, let's say.
Okay.
There are big features that we've used, but it has little to do with Nuxt and Vue. But of course, all those are in that ecosystem.
Mhm.
Take, for example, one project that took us, I want to say maybe a month to do. And we integrated Storyblock, which is a CMS,
Yes.
but we did it in a way where we made a whole bunch of granular widgets that you can use interchangeably to as building blocks rather than here is a gallery widget and it just shows gallery stuff, or here's this one other specialty widget and like that's all it does. We decided to go a different direction and make it more granular so you can intermix these. Here's a column widget, here is an image widget, and here's all these different properties of those. So that whole process took like a month and a half or something like that. But being able to get those into Nuxt and into Vue was very, very quick. Like out of the whole project, that was the least of our worries, and it made it exceptionally easy, especially with lazy loading and being reactive in the client side and all that stuff. Is very, very quick.
Like in general, I guess, can you talk about yourself? Like, I don't know if we had that in the beginning. So just kind of give an introduction again, like about, like how long you've been doing projects and, you know, what do you feel like you are like really good at, like after all these years, is it
Sure.
Nuxt or is it like something else, that you have on top of all that?
Okay. Yeah. So I've been programming for about 30 years. I started at an extraordinarily young age with GW Basic and C and C++ and all those things, a very, very long time ago. Professionally, I've been a programmer for like 20 something years. I've been at Real Truck for 12 years, which is kind of a very long time in today's, marketplace. But I enjoy working there. I enjoy getting to work with really, honestly, pretty cutting edge stuff when it comes down to it. You'd think someone that sells pickup truck accessories, would be an old mom and pop shop, but no, it's a very large company. We do a boatload of volume through Nuxt and Vue every single day. And we've had to deal with challenges, which are honestly pretty darn exciting and fun to deal with. One of them, for example, a little tangent,
Sure.
there was a problem with our products feeds. And so we of course sell products and we send feeds over to Google to tell them that we have these products. There was a bug in that the feeds were structured in such a way where Google thought every day these were new updated products. So it needed to hit us to see if those prices were correct and you could order it and all those fun things. Due to the way that we have our infrastructure set up in AWS as more or less infinitely scalable, Google likes to crawl you and see how long that took. Crawl you a little bit faster, see how long that took. And they'll keep on scaling until they see signs that, hey, maybe I should, hold up. Well, over a couple of months, it ramped up because they saw that they could keep on crawling us, because we kept on telling them that we had these new products when we really didn't. And it peaked at about 58 million server-side hits per day.
Wow. That's huge.
And so again, that's one of those things that Nuxt and Vue and AWS, they handle it perfectly fine. We could have gone, 14 times as much as that if we really wanted to, because it all scales. So it was really kind of a good testament of like how resilient some of these systems are
Yeah.
and how much load you can actually handle.
Yeah. And it's a testament to you and the engineering work you put in. So that's amazing. It's a great job.
Yeah, it was really fun. Gosh, other than that, yeah, Nuxt and Vue are kind of my bread and butter nowadays. I of course have used a boatload of stuff in the past, but it's been a very long time since I've done anything outside of Vue and Nuxt. I really enjoy it. I have looked at React before. I haven't honestly used React. From the stuff I see versus Vue, I really like the way Vue's style of doing things. I really love single
Sure.
file components and their simplicity, having everything in one focus area. And again, with Nuxt, if you wanted, have all your stuff in a focus area on a per page basis, like if you wanted your components for this page, your composables for this page, your assets, if you wanted to, for this page, you could totally do that with inside of Nuxt. You would just have to change some configuration through modules, like I said, because you can make it your own and have it do whatever you want. So I'm currently really enjoying that.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because so I've worked heavily with React and Next, and I think they're kind of almost like at the same pair, like, well, I would say pairing. I don't know if that's the right word, but one-to-one pairing, one-to-one mapping. That's what I'm going with the Vue community and Nuxt, because I see a lot of the same paradigms where you have server-side components versus client-side components. You have like the page level folder with the routing and stuff like that. Obviously Vue is kind of configured differently because you have the Vue files, but in React you have the React files, which is kind of like more just regular TSX or JavaScript files, and you can write in just like regular JavaScript, and you use JSX for React. But they're pretty like similar, I think, almost kind of like you can kind of swap out one. Like if you know like what's going on in React, you can kind of like figure it out in Vue. There is a little bit of a learning curve though with Vue, but I think that's only because like I kind of felt like when I was doing it, there was a little bit of like, stuff hidden from you. Like it's kind of feels magical or something like that. That's what they throw out about Vue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, especially with Nuxt too, especially with Nuxt 3. There's a lot of behind the scenes magic where I can just use this thing and it knows about it. TypeScript will know about it, and it's just plucking it out because it auto imported it for you.
Yeah.
Some people think that's great. Some people totally hate it. Well, guess what? You can totally disable that and manually do these things yourself if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
But I totally get what you're saying. It's very, very similar. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons it's called Nuxt, and it was named after Next, like literally a short period of time after Next was even announced, which is why they named it Nuxt.
I see. I see. That makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting seeing it, and I think a lot of people that I've talked to over the years, have come from different backgrounds. Like even the people that I've worked with, some have done, Vue.js before, and so it's interesting, kind of like talking about like these different paradigms, as we work project to project. Another thing I was going to ask you is, how does Nuxt kind of handle like, the DevOps side of things, if you're familiar? Like, this is like if you wanted to deploy like a Nuxt app, is there kind of like some trickiness around that? Like is it kind of like simple, or is it kind of difficult?
Yeah, honestly, it's pretty darn easy.
Okay.
With Nuxt 2, it's literally you build it and you can run it. And so you can run it either in the Lambda or as a static website like mine is, and stuff like that. But even with Nuxt 3, it's even easier because they have kind of providers built in where it'll automatically detect your environment. So, for example, you can deploy to Vercel, my project as it is today, and don't touch anything. It would automatically run it as a Vercel with a Lambda or a Vercel function right
Okay.
out of the bat without doing anything. If you want to build it and put it in a container, you can totally do that. But it has like, I want to say a dozen or more different providers that it already knows about. It can do very specific stuff for.
You mentioned Pug. Can you tell me why you like Pug again a little bit?
Sure. The first reason is you don't have to worry about end tags. So since it's kind of like a YAML type of thing where indents actually make a difference, there's twofold. It eliminates the ending tags for everything. So instantly, normally you'd have half of the lines, depending if you use your end tags as new lines or not. But also, the indentation makes it easier to read. So right off the bat, you're enforcing two different things and getting the benefits. That's honestly the two main reasons that we use it. It was a little bit of learning curve because there's some weird things, not a lot, but there's some weird things that you run into. But it's really enjoyable to look at, and it's really clean to be able to scan through your file and get to where you actually need to go quite quickly.
Do you have any conflicts, I guess, with Pug and like maybe using a Vue component that you've written? Like interchanging them? No? Okay.
No,
So,
but you can do view component as just a regular view component with HTML.
mhm.
You do another one with language equals pug, and it'll interpolate it just fine. It will compile it just fine because at the end of the day, they're all just string manipulation. There's render functions. After it goes through the processor, so
Yeah,
it knows about it.
yeah, they all get rebuilt or crunched down with is it so you're using Vite behind the scenes or is it Webpack or
By default, it uses Vite and Rollup, but
okay.
you can actually switch from Vite to Webpack as well if you wanted to.
Okay. And Vite is the better one, right? Like that's the more newer and faster one, I guess.
Depends on what you mean by better, but yeah, everyone is all about Vite nowadays.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Vite and it's something that I was interested in, as well. So, um, okay.
Yeah, it's crazy fast.
Um, Last question here, I guess. Can you be just kind of opinionated and tell me why you really love Vue over, you know, anything else? Like why would you not go to React or, some other framework?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the stuff I've seen with React is usually in JSX, and mixing in like HTML with JavaScript within the same file, like to me, is just crazy. Like, I don't know what this is, but this is an abomination. I'll just say it. What I feel about it. Versus Vue is like, here's a template. Makes sense. This is a template section. This is the script. You can have it in whatever language you want. It can be JavaScript, it can be TypeScript, what have you. Here's a style section. You can have it in stylus, plain CSS, Sass, whatever you want. And if you really don't want to, you can have them in separate files, or you can have them in one file, and everything that you need to focus on is in that one file. I come from a background of old school PHP, like way back in the day, where you'd have a CSS folder, an images folder, and some other folders where you have like maybe your rendering functions and your classes and stuff like that. Everything was all over the place. Vue single file component, I think, is just perfect because now your focus is right there. If I want to modify a component, if I want to modify a page, everything I need is literally right there, which is a huge time saver versus having your separation of concerns all over the place. Because really, at the end of the day, the concern is I want to do something with this page. And inevitably, I'm going to have to do something with the data, with the script, or the rendering, or maybe all three. And it's going to be in that one file. So that's one of the main reasons I just love Vue.
It's got good organization and it's easier for people coming from like other, code bases to follow rather than React, which kind of feels kind of loosey-goosey. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I got you. All right. Well, yeah, it's been great talking to you. Again, I wanted to thank you for your time and thank you for doing it today. Um, you know, we're happy to have you and I would love to have you again, like if you can, another time, like you want to take a deep dive on any particular aspects or things that come up.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right.
It's nice talking with you.
Yeah, same. Nice talking to
Yeah.
you. Have a great night.